The morning had started like any other for Officer Daniel Hayes. His uniform was crisp. His badge shone under the muted light of a cloudy sky, and his patrol car hummed steadily as it rolled through the streets of the small city. It was one of those shifts that felt predictable, quiet neighborhoods, the occasional pedestrian hurrying to work, traffic lights changing with mechanical rhythm. Daniel found comfort in this routine. After years of dealing with unpredictable dangers, these calm days gave him space to breathe. As he drove past the rows of old brick buildings, his eyes scanned the sidewalks, more out of habit than expectation. That was when he saw movement in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought it was nothing, just a stray shadow darting across the road. But when he glanced again, he spotted it clearly. A tiny puppy, no more than a few months old, chasing after his patrol car with determined little legs. Daniel slowed down slightly, puzzled. Stray dogs weren't uncommon in this part of town, but they usually ran away from cars, not toward them. This one, however, seemed fixated on him. Its ears flopped wildly as it ran, its paws slapping against the pavement in frantic rhythm. For such a small creature, it showed astonishing persistence. He tapped the brakes and came to a slow stop near the curb. The puppy stopped too, panting heavily, its chest heaving. For a moment, the two of them just looked at each other, the man in uniform behind the wheel, and the scrappy little animal standing defiantly in the street. Daniel's first thought was that the dog must be hungry. Perhaps someone had abandoned it, and now it was chasing cars in desperate hope of finding food or kindness. His heart softened. "Poor thing," he murmured, gripping the steering wheel. Still, years on the force had taught him to be cautious. Not every stray animal was safe to approach. But then, something happened that made him frown. The puppy barked high-pitched and sharp, not the playful sound of a pup wanting attention, but an urgent cry, almost demanding. Then it trotted forward a few steps, stopped, and turned back toward him, as if signaling him to follow. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What are you trying to tell me, little guy?" He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the gravel. The puppy immediately ran toward him, circling his feet before darting back a few paces. Then it stopped, tail wagging nervously, barking again with that same desperate tone. It wasn't just begging for food or affection. It was pleading. The officer crouched slightly, extending a hand. The pup didn't shy away. Instead, it pawed at his uniform, tugging lightly at the fabric as if trying to drag him somewhere. Daniel blinked, taken aback. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. "You actually want me to follow you?" Onlookers began to notice the odd scene. A woman carrying groceries slowed down, watching with curiosity. A young boy pointed and laughed, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, look! The police officer is being chased by a puppy." She chuckled but kept walking, shaking her head in amusement. Daniel, however, wasn't amused. Something about the urgency in the puppy's behavior stirred his instincts. He had learned long ago to trust those instincts. They had saved his life more than once. And right now, those instincts whispered that this was no ordinary encounter. He stood up straight, brushing off his pants, and looked down at the determined little creature. "All right, buddy," he said softly. "Show me what's wrong." The puppy barked again as if it understood. Then it spun around and bolted a few steps down the narrow side street, stopping only to glance back at him. Its eyes wide, pleading, full of something Daniel couldn't quite name met his own. In that instant, he felt a connection, strange yet undeniable. Against his better judgment, he followed. The puppy darted forward, its tiny body almost swallowed by the vastness of the street. Yet its determination made it seem larger than life. Daniel quickened his pace, his heavy boots echoing against the cracked pavement. He couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. "I'm a cop following a dog. What's next? Lassie leading me to a burning house? But even as he joked, he knew this was different. There was purpose in the way the puppy moved, purpose and desperation. It wasn't random wandering. It was leading him somewhere. Daniel cast a quick glance around. The city was waking up, shops rolling up their shutters, buses rumbling down the main road, the smell of freshly baked bread drifting from a bakery nearby. Life went on, ordinary and unbothered, while he found himself in the middle of something strange and extraordinary. The puppy barked again, louder this time, as if urging him not to fall behind. Daniel quickened his pace. "All right, I'm coming," he called out softly, almost embarrassed by the absurdity of talking to a dog. Yet deep inside, curiosity tugged at him stronger than pride. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this small, relentless puppy was about to change his entire day, and perhaps even his life. And so, with one last look at his idle patrol car parked on the curb, Daniel Hayes followed the tiny guide into the unknown. The small puppy didn't give Officer Daniel a moment to second-guess his choice. As soon as Daniel took his first step, the pup let out another high-pitched bark, then scampered forward with all the determination its tiny body could muster. Its paws slapped against the cracked pavement, its tail wagging in a nervous rhythm. But there was no playfulness in its movements. It wasn't luring him for fun. It was urging him, almost commanding him, to follow. Daniel's boots made heavy thuds on the ground compared to the light patter of the dog. He couldn't deny the strangeness of the situation. A uniformed police officer being led by a scruffy, undersized puppy down a side street. Passers-by slowed down, their expressions caught between curiosity and amusement. A group of teenagers whispered and chuckled, one of them pointing at the scene like it was something straight out of a comedy sketch. But for Daniel, this wasn't funny. Years on the force had taught him to read body language, whether it was people hiding lies, criminals masking intentions, or even animals acting out of instinct. And what he saw now in this pup's behavior wasn't random chaos. It was purposeful. The dog wasn't wandering. It wasn't lost. It wanted him to see something. The puppy suddenly stopped in the middle of the road and turned back, ears perked, eyes wide and glistening. Its small chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. It yipped sharply, as if saying, "Hurry up." Daniel closed the gap between them, but the moment he did, the pup bolted again, zigzagging between parked cars and dodging trash bins, as though it had made this journey more than once. "Slow down, buddy," Daniel muttered, though his legs lengthened their stride to keep up. He wasn't out of shape. Police training saw to that, but there was something humbling about being nearly outpaced by a creature barely the size of his boots. They crossed into narrower streets now, alleys cluttered with discarded boxes, broken bottles, and graffiti-painted walls. The air grew colder, sharper, filled with the faint metallic scent of rust mixed with dampness. It was the kind of street people avoided unless they had to be there. Daniel's pulse quickened. His instincts told him he was being pulled somewhere hidden, somewhere forgotten. The puppy darted forward, then stopped again, circling nervously until Daniel came closer. Each time, the pattern repeated: run, stop, check back, bark, and dash forward once more. It was as though the dog feared Daniel would give up if it didn't constantly remind him of the urgency. "Where are you taking me?" Daniel asked quietly, his voice almost drowned out by the distant hum of city life. The pup didn't answer, of course, but its bark echoed against the brick walls. Sharp and insistent. At one point, the little dog tugged at his pant leg again, teeth clamping down just enough to pull, not hurt. The message was crystal clear. Don't stand still. Come with me. Now. Daniel looked down at those determined eyes and felt an unexpected pang in his chest. He had seen desperation before in the eyes of victims begging for help, in children clutching to hope, in people who had nothing left but fear. And now, strangely enough, he saw it in the gaze of a puppy. The officer followed without hesitation. They passed a woman, hanging laundry outside her window. She leaned over the railing, eyebrows raised. "What's going on, officer?" she called out, clearly puzzled by the unusual scene. Daniel gave her a polite but distracted nod. "Just following a lead," he replied, half-truthful. The woman frowned, but said nothing more, watching as he disappeared down the alley with his unlikely guide. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. City noises faded, replaced by the echo of dripping water and the occasional rattle of loose metal from abandoned fire escapes. The pup slowed slightly now, its energy waning, but its urgency remained. Each bark was sharper, shorter, filled with insistence. Daniel felt his chest tighten. This wasn't a game. Something was waiting at the end of this strange pursuit, and whatever it was, it mattered deeply to the little dog. He had the sinking feeling it would matter to him too. Finally, the pup skidded to a halt in front of a tall dumpster tucked into a shadowed corner. It barked wildly, clawing at the ground, then ran to Daniel's feet and back to the dumpster again. It repeated the motion over and over, each time more frantic. Daniel approached cautiously, his senses sharpening the way they always did when he anticipated uncovering something hidden. His hand rested instinctively near his utility belt, not because he expected danger, but because years of training made readiness second nature. The pup leapt onto a battered cardboard box lying beside the dumpster, scratching at its edges. Its high-pitched whines turned into soft cries, heartbreaking in their intensity. Daniel's heart thudded against his ribs. He was no stranger to unpleasant discoveries. He had seen humanity's worst, but this felt different. This wasn't about criminals or crime scenes. This was about survival, about loyalty, about something pure. He crouched down slowly, reaching toward the box. The pup immediately stopped barking and pressed its body against the cardboard as if to guard it. Then it looked up at Daniel, eyes shimmering, pleading silently. "Please, help them." Daniel swallowed hard. Whatever was inside, he knew it wasn't going to be easy to see. Yet he couldn't back away now. The relentless pursuit had led him here, step by step, block by block. The puppy hadn't given up on him. He couldn't give up on the puppy. With careful hands, he lifted the flap of the box. A faint whimper reached his ears, soft but unmistakable. His breath caught, his vision narrowing as he peered inside. In that moment, the world seemed to still. The noise of the city, the footsteps of strangers, even the distant hum of traffic, everything faded into silence. All that remained was the sight before him. Daniel Hayes, the seasoned police officer, felt his throat tighten, his heart twist painfully. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared for this. And yet, here it was, raw and undeniable. What lay inside that box would change everything. And it was all because one relentless little puppy refused to stop until he was heard. Daniel's breath came heavier now, not from exhaustion, but from anticipation. The small puppy's strange determination had pulled him through streets he rarely walked during patrol. The usual city noises, the rumble of cars, the chatter of passers-by, seemed far behind him. Here, the alleys felt quieter, the buildings taller, shadows deeper. Each step forward was a step into uncertainty. The pup, though tiny, carried an energy that demanded attention. It ran ahead, stopped, turned back, then barked with the same sharp urgency. Daniel noticed its eyes gleaming every time it checked to make sure he was still following. He wasn't being led blindly. He was being tested, coaxed, and begged all at once. The dog's little heart was clearly beating for something bigger than itself. At one point, the pup darted behind a sagging wooden fence, slipping through a gap too narrow for Daniel. The officer sighed and walked around, entering from the open end of the alley. He found the pup waiting, tail stiff, body shivering, as if fighting the cold and the fear of losing its guide. "All right," Daniel whispered, crouching for a moment. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The reassurance seemed unnecessary, but Daniel found himself speaking to the dog as though it were a partner. The years had hardened him. Police work had a way of dulling emotions, wrapping them in layers of armor. But this little creature was stripping away those layers bit by bit, pulling him into a story he hadn't chosen, yet couldn't walk away from. They continued deeper into the maze of alleys. The ground was littered with crumpled cans, broken bottles, and discarded wrappers. Graffiti sprawled across brick walls like silent screams of forgotten voices. Daniel's flashlight flicked on instinctively, even though daylight still reached the ground. Shadows had a way of hiding things, and his instincts demanded clarity. The pup barked again, but this time the sound was weaker. Daniel frowned. The relentless pace had drained the little dog, but it refused to stop. Its loyalty and desperation fueled every step, even as fatigue pulled at its tiny body. Daniel quickened his stride and bent down mid-step, scooping the dog gently into his arms. "You're going to burn out before we get there," he muttered. The puppy squirmed, but didn't resist. From Daniel's chest, it barked once more, a sharp sound that echoed in the alley. Then it wiggled free, dropping to the ground and running forward with renewed purpose. Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Stubborn little soldier," he said. The path grew narrower. The air damper, filled with the metallic tongue of rust and something else, something stale. Daniel's senses sharpened. He wasn't afraid of alleys, but he had learned that hidden corners often concealed painful truths. And this pup was leading him straight toward one dot as they rounded a corner. Daniel noticed a small cluster of pigeons scattering from the ground. The pup ignored them, focusing only on its invisible destination. It yipped sharply, dashing ahead, then freezing in place before a towering dumpster. The dog pawed at the ground, whining now instead of barking, as though its courage wavered at the final step. Daniel slowed. His stomach knotted with unease. He had been in countless tense situations, but this one felt different, less dangerous, perhaps, but heavier in a way he couldn't explain. He stepped closer, scanning the dumpster, the shadows, the ground. That was when he noticed the box. A battered cardboard box slumped against the metal frame of the dumpster, sagging with dampness, stained with dirt. It might have blended into the trash, if not for the pup clawing at it with desperate paws. Each scratch was frantic, urgent, almost painful to watch. Daniel's chest tightened. He crouched down slowly, his shadow falling across the box. The puppy stopped scratching and pressed itself against the box protectively. Then it looked up at Daniel with eyes that said more than any human words could. "Please, help me, help them." For a long moment, Daniel hesitated. He had seen terrible things in boxes before, abandoned animals, even infants in his darker cases. Boxes had a way of holding secrets too heavy for the world. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a crime scene, he reminded himself, but his instincts screamed otherwise. He extended a gloved hand and touched the edge of the flap. The cardboard was soft, sagging, almost collapsing beneath his fingers. Carefully, he pulled it open. A sound emerged, soft, fragile, heartbreaking. A whimper. Then another. Tiny movements rustled inside, and two small shapes shifted weakly in the shadows of the box. Daniel froze. His eyes widened, his breath trapped halfway between inhaling and exhaling. Inside were two puppies, smaller than the one who had led him here. Their ribs showed, their fur matted, their eyes only half open. They trembled violently, shivering from cold and hunger, their whimpers barely audible, yet piercing to the heart. The loyal pup barked once, then lowered its head into the box, licking one of the weaker siblings as if to reassure them. Daniel's throat tightened. His vision blurred for a moment, and he blinked rapidly to clear it. It all clicked into place. This wasn't about food. It wasn't about attention. The puppy hadn't chased him out of desperation for itself. It had been begging him to come here for them. Daniel swallowed hard, his chest aching. He crouched lower, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into the box. The smaller puppies whimpered, but didn't resist as he scooped them carefully into his arms. Their tiny bodies felt weightless, but the burden of their suffering was crushing. The loyal pup climbed into his lap, nudging its siblings as if to say, "See? I brought help. We're safe now." Daniel couldn't hold back the swell of emotion rising in him. He had seen grief, anger, fear emotions painted across human faces in his line of work. But this loyalty, this desperate determination of a small creature to save its family, was something purer than anything he had witnessed in years. His throat tightened until words barely came out. You little hero," he whispered. In that dark alley, beside a dumpster and a tattered box, Officer Daniel Hayes felt his armor crack. Tears he hadn't shed in years welled in his eyes. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, unashamed. Because this wasn't about him. This was about them, 3 helpless lives, saved not by chance, but by the relentless courage of one small puppy who refused to give up. And Daniel knew, deep in his heart, that his journey with these pups had only just begun. Daniel froze as his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering into the alley. Inside the tattered cardboard box, nestled against shredded newspaper and scraps of old fabric, were not 1 but 3 fragile little lives. 3 tiny puppies, barely weeks old, huddled together in a trembling mass of fur. Their ribs showed through their thin skin, their eyes wide with both fear and hope. The faint whimpers that had first caught Daniel's ear grew louder as they sensed his presence. The officer's breath hitched. He had seen hunger before, in the hollow cheeks of neglected children or the gaunt faces of addicts on the streets. But there was something uniquely heartbreaking about seeing it in these innocent creatures. Their tiny bodies quivered with weakness, yet when one of them lifted its head and let out a faint cry, Daniel felt an ache deep in his chest that words could not contain. This first puppy, the one who had led him here, scrambled forward, nudging the box with urgency. It let out a sharp bark, almost scolding Daniel for not acting fast enough. Then it pressed itself protectively against the other pups, curling around them as if trying to shield them from the world. Daniel lowered himself to the ground, his knees brushing the cold, uneven pavement. For a moment, he just watched. Years on the force had hardened him in many ways. He had learned to build walls around his heart, to withstand the suffering he saw daily. But now, staring into that box, he felt those walls crack and crumble. "Where's your mama?" he whispered softly, though he already suspected the truth. No mother dog hovered nearby. No larger shadow waited in the corner. These puppies had been abandoned or worse, discarded like trash. The thought made his stomach twist. He clenched his jaw, fighting the rising tide of anger. He had dealt with criminals who preyed on the weak, and in his eyes, this was no different. Whoever had left these puppies here to starve had committed a cruelty he could barely comprehend. The little scout puppy whined again, pawing at Daniel's leg, as if pleading, "Do something. Save them," and Daniel knew he would. Carefully, he reached into the box. The puppies recoiled at first, instinctively afraid of the unfamiliar touch. But his hands were gentle, his movements slow. He lifted one small body, cradling it in his palms. It was lighter than he expected, fragile like a feather, yet trembling with life. Its soft fur tickled his skin, and when it let out a faint squeak, Daniel's throat tightened. He examined each pup one by one, noting their condition: thin, dehydrated, but still alive. Hope flickered in his chest. They had a chance, if only he acted quickly. The scout puppy watched closely, its tail wagging weakly as Daniel handled the others. It was clear now, this little dog hadn't been searching for food or shelter for itself. It had been searching for someone strong enough to help its siblings. That kind of loyalty, that kind of courage, moved Daniel more than he could explain. For a brief moment, memories from his own childhood surfaced. Nights when he and his sister huddled together in their small bedroom, while their parents argued downstairs. Times when he had felt powerless, yet determined to protect her from the world. Looking at the scout pup, Daniel saw a reflection of his younger self, the desperate protector, doing whatever it took to keep family safe. He blinked hard, brushing away the sting in his eyes. This wasn't the time to drown in memories. These puppies needed him now. He stood, holding the box carefully against his chest. The scout puppy trotted at his heels, still issuing occasional barks as though to say, "Don't mess this up. They're depending on you." Daniel couldn't help but let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, I hear you." Loud and clear. As he started back through the alleys, people noticed him again. This time, their eyes widened not with amusement, but with curiosity and sympathy. The sight of a police officer carrying a box of whimpering puppies tugged at something in everyone who saw it. Some smiled softly, others whispered to one another, and a few even offered words of encouragement, but Daniel hardly noticed. His focus was locked on the tiny creatures in his care. He walked briskly, his stride purposeful, every instinct telling him to move faster. The police station wasn't far, but he knew it wasn't the right destination. No, these pups needed a vet, not paperwork. He turned toward his patrol car, parked a few blocks away, the scout puppy still trailing close behind. The little one, despite its exhaustion, refused to leave his side. Each time Daniel glanced down, he was met with those same determined eyes. Eyes that said, "You're not finished yet." When he finally reached the car, Daniel opened the passenger door and carefully set the box inside. The scout puppy immediately leapt onto the seat, settling next to its siblings. It licked their faces, nuzzled them, and then looked back at Daniel, as if to say, "See? I did my part. Now it's your turn." Daniel closed the door gently, then leaned against the car for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. His chest ached with a mix of sorrow and resolve. He couldn't undo the cruelty these puppies had suffered, but he could make sure their story didn't end here, in a dirty alley inside a forgotten box. Climbing into the driver's seat, he started the engine. The hum of the car masked the soft whines from the box, but each sound struck him like an arrow. They were counting on him, and he would not fail them. As he pulled onto the street, sirens blaring faintly in the distance from other patrols, Daniel muttered under his breath, "Hang in there, little ones. We're going to get you help." The road ahead seemed longer than usual, every red light and pedestrian crossing testing his patience. But through it all, the scout pup never stopped watching him. Every time Daniel glanced sideways, there it was, alert, unwavering, silently urging him forward. And Daniel realized something profound in that moment. This wasn't just about saving abandoned puppies. This was about trust, about faith placed in him by a creature that couldn't even speak. The scout pup had chosen him out of everyone in the city. It had believed in him. That belief was something Daniel couldn't and wouldn't betray. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The vet clinic wasn't far now. Salvation was within reach. But little did Daniel know, this journey was only the beginning. The discovery in that box would unravel a story far deeper than he imagined. A story of neglect, resilience, and unexpected bonds that would change his life forever. The box of puppies had been found. The mission to save them had begun. And Officer Daniel Hayes was ready to fight for them, no matter what it took. The engine's steady hum filled the car as Daniel guided the patrol cruiser through the maze of city streets. The night had grown darker, and the occasional glow from traffic lights cast fleeting shadows across his face. In the passenger seat, the box shifted slightly as the pups stirred, their weak whimpers carrying a weight that pressed heavily on his chest. The Scout puppy, curled protectively against its siblings, lifted its head every few moments to check on Daniel. Its gaze was unrelenting, piercing through the gloom, filled with both exhaustion and trust. Daniel glanced back at it and whispered, "We're almost there, buddy. Just hold on." Each red light felt like an eternity. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as he tapped impatiently, resisting the urge to flip on his siren. This wasn't an official emergency, not in the eyes of the department, but in his heart. It was as urgent as any call he had ever answered. His mind drifted to the darker possibilities. He had seen it before. Animals too far gone, victims of starvation or neglect, who simply didn't make it, no matter how much effort was poured into saving them. The thought of losing even one of these puppies made his stomach twist. He forced himself to focus on the road, clinging to the hope that he had found them in time. Finally, the familiar blue and white sign of the veterinary clinic came into view, glowing softly against the night sky. Relief washed through him like a wave, loosening the knot in his chest. He pulled into the lot with a sharp turn, parked hastily, and hurried out of the car. Lifting the box carefully, Daniel felt the frailty of the small lives inside. The Scout pup leapt down from the seat and trotted faithfully at his side as he pushed through the clinic's glass doors. The sharp scent of antiseptic greeted him, mingled with the faint hum of soft instrumental music. Behind the counter, a young receptionist looked up, startled at the sight of a uniformed officer carrying a box of animals. "Officer? Is everything okay?" "No," Daniel replied quickly, his voice firm but strained. He set the box on the counter and gently pushed it toward her. "They need help. Right now." The woman peered inside and gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, God." She immediately reached for the phone. "Dr. Patel, we need you up front now." Within seconds, a middle-aged veterinarian in scrubs emerged from the back, his expression calm but focused. He approached, pulling on gloves as he leaned over the box. One look was enough to make his brow furrow. "They're malnourished," he muttered, gently lifting one of the tiny bodies. "Dehydrated too, but they're alive. You got them here just in time." Daniel exhaled, tension easing slightly. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing for now," Dr. Patel replied, motioning for a vet tech to bring supplies. "We'll take care of them. 4 fluids, warmth, and food in small amounts. They have a fighting chance." The Scout puppy barked once, as if echoing the words. It wagged its tail weakly, watching anxiously as its siblings were carried into the back. The vet crouched down, noticing the little protector. "And this one?" he asked. Daniel shook his head. "He's the reason I found them. Stronger than the rest, but he looks exhausted." Dr. Patel smiled faintly. "He's a fighter. Don't worry, we'll check him too." As the staff bustled around, Daniel found himself sinking into one of the waiting chairs. For the first time since the chase began, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. His heart was still pounding, but the sterile, reassuring environment of the clinic gave him hope. The receptionist offered him a cup of water, which he accepted with a quiet thank you. His hands trembled slightly as he held it. He realized just how much adrenaline had been coursing through him. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Each time the door to the back swung open, Daniel looked up expectantly. Finally, Dr. Patel returned, wiping his hands on a towel. "They're stable," he announced. "We've started them on fluids, and they've accepted a little food. It'll be touch and go for the next 24 hours, but they're strong enough to fight." Daniel nodded, relief nearly overwhelming him. "Thank you, Doctor. Truly." Dr. Patel studied him for a moment, curiosity flickering in his eyes. You didn't have to bring them here yourself. Most people would have called animal control. Daniel glanced down at his boots, then back up. Most people didn't have a little dog chasing them halfway across the city, refusing to quit until I listened. He believed in me. I couldn't let him down. The vet smiled softly, nodding in understanding. Animals have a way of finding the right people. Looks like this one found you. Daniel looked toward the scout puppy, now curled up on a blanket one of the staff had provided. Its chest rose and fell steadily, its eyes half closed but still watching him. He felt a swell of emotion, stronger than anything he had expected. For years, he had carried the weight of other people's pain, compartmentalizing it, locking it away behind the walls he had built as a cop. But tonight, something shifted. These tiny lives had pierced through those walls, reminding him that even in a world filled with cruelty, there was still innocence worth protecting. As he sat there, a thought took root in his mind, one that he hadn't dared to consider before. Saving these puppies wasn't just a duty. It felt like destiny. Maybe, just maybe, this was more than chance. The night stretched on, the clinic quiet except for the occasional rustle of movement behind closed doors. Daniel stayed until the vet assured him the pups were resting comfortably. When he finally rose to leave, the scout puppy let out a soft whine, as if protesting his departure. Daniel crouched down, scratching behind its ears. "Don't worry, little one. I'll be back." The puppy's tail thumped weakly against the blanket, and for the first time that night, Daniel smiled. As he stepped out into the cool air, the city lights flickering above, he knew this was far from over. The puppies were safe for now, but questions remained. Who had abandoned them? Why here in such a cruel way? And why, of all people, had this tiny protector chosen him? The answers would come, Daniel was certain. But one thing was already clear. His life had changed the moment that puppy tugged at his pant leg, and there was no going back. The city was quiet when Daniel stepped back onto the streets, the kind of quiet that only came in the hours after midnight. His cruiser sat beneath a flickering street lamp, its headlights casting a pale cone onto the pavement. For a moment, he just stood there, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, replaying the night's events over and over in his mind. The image of the box wouldn't leave. Him, the frail puppies, shivering in the dark. The scout pups' desperate determination. The way their soft cries had pierced the silence. They were safe now, at least for the moment, but the questions gnawed at him. Who had abandoned them? And why? Daniel wasn't naive. He had seen humanity at its worst. But this wasn't the kind of crime that made the evening news or earned headlines. This was quiet cruelty, the kind that slipped under the radar, unnoticed and unpunished. That fact unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He slid into the driver's seat, resting his hands on the wheel without starting the engine. He should have been heading home, grabbing what little rest he could before his next shift. But something in his gut told him the story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. With a tired sigh, he started the engine and pulled away from the clinic. He wasn't ready to let the night end just yet. The next morning, sunlight spilled across his small apartment. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling between his hands, his laptop open in front of him. He had been scrolling through reports, neighborhood complaints, and call logs from the precinct. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he kept going, combing through records of abandoned animals and related disturbances. There, it was a complaint filed just 3 days ago. A neighbor had reported suspicious activity in an old warehouse near the same alley where Daniel had found the pups. Strange noises, dogs barking, shadows moving in and out late at night. Animal control had been notified, but with limited resources, the report had been shelved. Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly. His instincts had been right. This wasn't random. Those puppies weren't just tossed aside by chance. Something was happening in that part of the city. Something hidden in the cracks of society, where too few people bothered to look. He closed the laptop and grabbed his keys. Whatever he was about to find, he needed to see it with his own eyes. The warehouse loomed like a relic of forgotten times. Its corrugated metal walls rusted and scarred with graffiti. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement, and shattered glass crunched under Daniel's boots as he approached. The air smelled faintly of oil and damp wood. He kept his steps quiet, instincts sharpened. This wasn't an official investigation. He had no backup, no warrant, just a gut feeling. But sometimes, a gut feeling was enough to save lives. Peering through a crack in the boarded-up window, he caught sight of movement. Shadows flickered inside, accompanied by faint yelps and whines that made his pulse quicken. There was no mistaking it. Dogs. More of them. Daniel's jaw tightened. Whoever was using this warehouse wasn't simply abandoning animals. They were keeping them here. For what purpose, he couldn't be sure yet. Breeding? Fighting? Whatever the reason, it was wrong. He stepped back, weighing his options. He couldn't storm in alone. Not without risking harm to himself or the animals. But he couldn't just walk away either. Pulling out his phone, he snapped a few discreet photos of the building, then typed a quick message to a trusted colleague at the precinct. He kept it vague just enough to raise a flag without revealing too much. He'd need to build a case before anyone would act. As he slid the phone back into his pocket, a sound behind him made him freeze. A soft bark. Daniel turned, and there it was, the scout puppy. Somehow, impossibly, it had found him again. Its tail wagged weakly, but its eyes carried the same urgency as before. Daniel crouched, scratching its ears. You again, huh? Guess I shouldn't be surprised. The pup pressed against his leg, whining softly as if to say, Don't stop now. Keep going. Daniel smiled faintly, though his heart was heavy. This little one had already shown more courage than many adults he knew. It wasn't coincidence anymore. It was partnership. That evening, Daniel returned to the vet clinic. The puppies had survived the night, and though still weak, they were improving. The staff greeted him warmly, surprised but not displeased to see him again. The scout pup had been checked as well. Aside from fatigue and slight dehydration, it was in better shape than its siblings. Yet it refused to leave their side. Hovering protectively, as though its very presence kept them alive, Dr. Patel approached Daniel with a thoughtful expression. You've been here twice in less than 24 hours, officer. These pups seem to mean a lot to you. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. They do, especially that one. He motioned toward the scout pup. It led me to them. If it hadn't, I don't even want to think about what would have happened. The vet's gaze softened. Animals don't form bonds like that without reason. He's chosen you. Daniel looked back at the pup, who met his eyes with quiet certainty. The weight of those words sank in, deeper than he expected. Chosen. It felt like the truth. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. His thoughts swirled about the warehouse, the abandoned pups, and the strange bond with the little scout. His life as a cop had always been about duty, about following the rules and protocols. But this was different. For the first time in a long while, his heart felt needed. The scout puppy's face flashed in his mind, its unwavering eyes locked on his. Daniel realized he couldn't turn away. Not from the pups. Not from the warehouse. And certainly not from the bond that had already begun to reshape him. As dawn crept across the sky, one thing was certain. The unanswered questions demanded answers. And Daniel Hayes was going to find them, no matter how deep he had to dig. The case was no longer just about saving puppies. It was about uncovering the truth. It had only just begun. The city never truly slept, but there were hours when its heartbeat slowed, when the noise softened to a restless murmur, and shadows seemed to take on a life of their own. In those hours, Officer Daniel Hayes prepared himself for something he knew could change everything, not just for him, but for the helpless animals depending on him. The warehouse loomed in his mind all day, gnawing at him as he went through routine patrols. He couldn't shake the images, the peeling paint, the rusted walls, the muffled sounds of dogs inside. His instincts told him it was more than abandonment. It was organized, deliberate, cruel, and if he didn't act, no one would doubt by evening. His plan was set. He had shown the photos to a colleague, Sergeant Morales, a man he trusted implicitly. Morales was skeptical at first, but Daniel's conviction was contagious. With persistence and a careful push, Daniel persuaded him to pull a few strings. Within hours, an unmarked van and 2 squad cars were parked discreetly. A block from the warehouse. Daniel stood with Morales in the shadows of a side alley, adjusting his bulletproof vest. His heart pounded steadily, not from fear of what lay ahead, but from the thought of the lives inside that building. This wasn't like any other bust he'd been on. This one carried a strange weight, personal, raw, emotional. Morales gave him a firm clap on the shoulder. "You're too invested, Hayes. But maybe that's what this job needs sometimes." Daniel nodded, unable to put into words the storm inside him. He crouched down, glancing at the scout pup sitting quietly at his side. Against all odds, the little dog had made its way back to him once more. He had tried to leave it at the clinic, but the staff had laughed and said it refused to settle unless he was nearby. Tonight, it seemed to understand the gravity of the mission, its tiny body trembling, yet its eyes resolute. "You've done your part," Daniel whispered, running a hand over its head. "Now it's my turn." The signal came. The team moved. The warehouse door creaked under the pressure of the crowbar before it gave way. Officers stormed inside, flashlights slicing through the darkness. The air reeked of filth and fear, thick with the sound of panicked barking. Daniel was among the first in, his beam landing on row after row of cages. Dogs of all sizes and breeds, pressed against rusted bars, eyes wide with terror. Many were thin, their ribs visible, their fur matted. The cries rose in a chorus that cut deep into Daniel's chest. "Clear the rooms." Morales barked, his voice steady. 2 men scrambled from the shadows near the back, their faces masked with shock and guilt. One bolted toward the side exit, but an officer tackled him before he reached it. The other froze, raising his hands in surrender as Morales and another officer closed in. Daniel barely registered the arrests. His focus was on the cages, his flashlight sweeping over trembling bodies. A German shepherd with scars along its muzzle growled defensively. A litter of pups whimpered, piled on top of each other for warmth. In another corner, a bulldog lay unmoving, its shallow breaths barely audible. His throat tightened, but training kept his hands steady as he snapped open locks with bolt cutters handed to him by another officer. One by one, cages opened. One by one, dogs hesitated before stepping into freedom. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured to a shaking hound as it pressed against the back of its cage, too terrified to move. He crouched low, voice gentle. "You're safe now." Slowly the dog inched forward, sniffing his hand before collapsing into his arms with a shuddering sigh. The raid lasted less than an hour, but the emotional weight made it feel endless. By the time the last cage was opened, the officers were coated in grime, sweat, and the lingering scent of neglect. The men arrested were escorted out in cuffs, their shouts drowned by the chorus of barking and whimpering. Daniel stood in the middle of the chaos, his chest heaving. Around him, volunteers from a local rescue group rushed in, carrying blankets, leashes, and crates. The warehouse had transformed from a place of suffering into a hive of rescue and care. The scout pup trotted in behind Daniel, tail wagging with renewed vigor. It darted from cage to cage as if checking on each animal, barking softly like a leader calling roll. Daniel couldn't help but smile through the heaviness. "You little hero," he whispered Dot as the dogs were carefully let out. Daniel lingered by the bulldog lying weakly in the corner. Kneeling, he checked its pulse, relieved to feel the faint but steady beat. He lifted the dog into his arms, grimacing at its weight and frailty. "Hang in there, buddy," he murmured. "We've got you." Outside, the night air felt fresher, though the cries of rescued animals echoed all around. Vans lined the curb, ready to transport them to clinics and shelters. The street, once eerily quiet, now buzzed with urgency and hope. Morales approached Daniel, giving him a rare, approving smile. "You did good tonight." "Real good." Daniel looked around, at the rows of crates being loaded, at the volunteers wiping tears from their cheeks, at the scout pup weaving proudly between boots and paws. He exhaled deeply. It wasn't me. It was him. He pointed at the tiny dog. "He led me here." Morales followed his gaze, shaking his head in disbelief. "Then I guess we all owe him our thanks." Hours later, when the last of the dogs were transported and the street fell quiet again, Daniel sat on the curb, exhaustion pulling at his body. The scout pup curled up against his boots, finally resting after its relentless mission. For the first time since it had tugged at his pant leg that morning, Daniel allowed himself to breathe fully. The horror they'd uncovered was undeniable, but so was the hope that had emerged from it. He stroked the pup's fur, whispering, "We're not done yet. But tonight, we saved them." We really did. The little dog stirred, pressing its tiny head against his palm, and in that simple gesture, Daniel felt a truth more powerful than any case he had ever closed. It wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about listening when no one else would. And sometimes, the smallest voices carried the biggest truths. The city dawned in muted shades of gold and gray, the kind of sunrise that promised a new day, yet carried the heaviness of the one before. For Officer Daniel Hess, that morning felt different. The warehouse raid still lingered in his mind, a montage of sights and sounds that refused to fade, the rattling of cages, the frantic whimpers, the sight of lives stolen and abused. But alongside the sorrow was something else, a quiet, determined hope. He sat in the police station's break room, sipping lukewarm coffee while scrolling through updates on his phone. News outlets had already picked up the story. Illegal animal operation busted by local police. The headlines spoke of cruelty uncovered and lives saved. Photos showed volunteers carrying shivering dogs from the shadows of that decaying warehouse into the light. For once, the media painted the precinct as heroes, though. Daniel knew in his heart the real hero had 4 legs and a stubborn spirit. His fellow officers congratulated him in passing. Morales even dropped by with a clap on the shoulder and a rare grin. "Hayes, you've started something here. People won't forget this." Daniel nodded, but words escaped him. Because while the world saw a raid and arrests, he saw faces. Dozens of them. Big eyes, small eyes, scared eyes, all looking at him as though begging him not to walk away. And then there was the scout pup. Later that morning, Daniel returned to the vet clinic where the rescued animals had been taken. The building buzzed with life. Volunteers sorting food in blankets, veterinarians moving from one exam room to another, dogs barking in a mixture of confusion and relief. It was chaos, but a good kind of chaos, the kind born from saving lives. As soon as Daniel stepped inside, the scout pup bounded toward him. Its tail wagged so hard that its entire body shook, and it barked in a sharp, joyous rhythm. People nearby chuckled at the sight, but for Daniel, it pierced straight through his heart. The pup hadn't forgotten. Not a chance. "You again," Daniel murmured with a smile, crouching to scoop it up. The little dog wriggled against his chest, licking his chin with relentless affection. Dr. Patel, the veterinarian overseeing the rescues, approached with a clipboard. She paused, smiling knowingly at the sight. "He's been waiting for you," she said. Barely ate, barely rested. Kept watching the door like he knew you'd walk through. Daniel scratched the pup's ears. "Guess he doesn't take no for an answer. Smart pup," Patel replied. Her tone softened. "He's healthy, all things considered. Resilient. The kind of dog who survives not just for himself, but for others." "That's rare." Daniel looked into the puppy's eyes and felt the truth of those words. Rare indeed. The following days blurred into a whirlwind of paperwork, interviews, and follow-up investigations. The men arrested during the raid faced charges of animal cruelty, illegal breeding, and intent to distribute. The evidence Daniel and his team collected, the photographs, the veterinary reports, the testimonies, was enough to build a strong case. For once, justice seemed within reach. But while the legal machine turned, Daniel found himself drawn again and again to the clinic. Each time, the scout pup greeted him with uncontainable joy, its spirit undimmed despite everything it had endured. Each time, Daniel told himself he was only checking in, making sure things were running smoothly. Yet deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't there for the case. He was there for the dog. One evening, Morales caught him on his way out of the precinct, the pup's tiny face still fresh in his thoughts. "You're going back there again, aren't you?" Morales asked, smirking. Daniel chuckled sheepishly. "Maybe." Morales tilted his head. "You ever think this little guy chose you for a reason?" The question stayed with Daniel all night. The decision came quietly, not as a sudden revelation, but as the steady recognition of something undeniable. By the end of the week, Daniel filled out the adoption forms. The staff at the clinic celebrated, a small cheer echoing through the reception area as Patel handed him the finalized papers. "You're officially his human now," she said warmly. Daniel crouched down, holding the pup in his arms. "Guess it's you and me, partner," he whispered. The pup yipped in response, tail wagging as though it had understood every word. He named him Scout, because that's what he had been from the very beginning. The one who scouted the way, who refused to give up until help was found. Life didn't transform overnight. Daniel still worked long shifts, still faced the grind of policing a city filled with problems too large for one man to solve. But with Scout by his side, something fundamental shifted. His apartment, once silent and sterile, now rang with the patter of paws and the sound of playful barks. His days, once consumed by endless duty, now held small moments of unexpected joy, morning walks, tug-of-war battles. The warm weight of loyalty curled against his side at night. Yet the greatest change was inward. The case had reminded him of something he'd nearly forgotten, that his job wasn't just about laws and orders, but about compassion. About listening when no one else would. About responding to cries that might otherwise be ignored. Scout became more than a pet. He was a reminder of resilience, of hope born from the darkest corners of the city. Months later, Daniel sat in a crowded courtroom as the trial of the men responsible unfolded. He gave his testimony calmly, presenting the evidence without wavering. Yet through it all, he thought of Scout waiting at home, safe and loved, and the countless other animals who had found new beginnings because of that night. When the guilty verdicts were read, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, not perfectly, but enough to matter. Enough to send a message that cruelty would not go unseen. Afterward, as he walked out of the courthouse, Morales clapped him on the back again. "Not bad for a case you stumbled into, thanks to a puppy," Daniel smiled. Not just any puppy. The right one. That evening, back at his apartment, Scout bounded into his arms, as though he'd been gone for years instead of hours. Daniel laughed, dropping to his knees as the pup covered him in wet kisses. You saved them, buddy, he said softly. You saved me too. Scout wagged his tail furiously. As if agreeing Dot in that moment, Daniel realized the truth. Heroes came in all shapes and sizes. Some wore uniforms and badges. Others wore fur and had paws that left prints not just on the ground, but on the heart. Dot, and together they had written a story not of endings, but of beginnings, proof that hope could be found in the smallest voices, and that even in a world full of darkness, one determined pup could light the way. The city carried on, restless and unyielding. But in a small apartment, tucked within its vastness, a man and his dog built a new life. A partnership forged not by chance, but by courage. Officer Daniel Hayes had found his calling again, and Scout, the relentless little puppy who had once tugged at a pant leg for help, had found his forever home. A new beginning for both of them.